Marcus Hale had always been the first one in and the last one out. His quiet dedication had earned him respect, albeit begrudgingly from his peers, and he'd risen through the ranks faster than anyone had expected. At 42, Marcus was now leading one of the most ambitious projects in the history of Halcyon Tech, a system that promised to revolutionize the industry and rake in over $500 million in revenue. It was his ticket to the top, the final step before becoming one of the senior leaders. In the weeks leading up to the project's unveiling, Marcus had poured everything into it, pushing his team hard and himself even harder. His boss, Richard Banner, the company's calculating CEO, had been unusually hands-on, making it clear just how high the stakes were. "You know what this means, right?" Richard had said, leaning in during one of their strategy meetings. His voice was cool, but his eyes had a fire Marcus rarely saw. Failure is not an option. This system could make or break Halcyon, and you're leading it. Marcus had nodded solemnly. He knew what was at stake not just for the company, but for him personally. His career was poised on the brink of a new chapter, and this project was the key. But what Richard didn't know was how personal the stakes really were. Marcus had spent the last decade sacrificing everything: his personal life, relationships, even his health on the altar of success. His wife, Sarah, had left him 2 years ago, tired of competing with a job that always came first. She'd taken their daughter, Emily, leaving Marcus alone in the penthouse apartment that now felt more like a cage than a home. So the day of the unveiling drew closer. Marcus could feel the tension in his bones. But his team was exhausted but ready. The system was flawless, at least as flawless as a project of this magnitude could be. But something gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't quite shake. It was too quiet, too smooth. And Marcus knew from experience that nothing in business or in life was ever that easy. The morning of the unveiling began like any other. Marcus woke before dawn, made himself a simple breakfast toast, eggs and bacon, and sat in silence. The city was still asleep outside his window, but his mind was already racing. Today was the day that would change everything. But as he got into his car and started driving toward the office, something happened that Marcus hadn't planned for. At a small intersection, while waiting for the light to turn green, he noticed a young girl sitting on the curb, her face pale and her body hunched, as if she were in pain. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, and something about her struck a chord in Marcus, perhaps the memory of Emily, who was about the same age. He pulled over and walked toward her cautiously. "Are you okay?" he asked, kneeling down to her level. The girl looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes but said nothing. Her school uniform was neatly pressed, and her shoes had the same bright yellow laces Emily had worn to school just 2 years earlier. "Where's your mom?" Marcus pressed, trying to coax her into speaking. After a long silence, she whispered, "I don't feel good." Her voice was so small, so frail, that Marcus's heart clenched. He couldn't just leave her there. Looking at the time, he knew the meeting was drawing close, but he couldn't ignore this. After coaxing the girl, whose name was Sandra, to give him her mother's contact information, Marcus called the woman, explaining the situation. Her mother was frantic and promised to come as quickly as possible. 30 minutes later, Sandra's mother arrived, relief flooding her face as she saw her daughter safe. She thanked Marcus profusely, promising to repay his kindness. But Marcus waved it off. "No need," he said, giving Sandra a gentle smile. "Just make sure she's okay." As he got back into his car, he glanced at the dashboard clock and felt a wave of panic wash over him. He was late, far too late. The meeting he had been building up to for months was already underway, and there was no way he'd make it in time. When Marcus finally arrived at Halcyon Tech, the meeting had already concluded. His stomach twisted with dread as he entered the office. His assistant, Sarah, rushed toward him with a nervous look. "Marcus, where were you?" The meeting she began, but before she could finish, Richard Banner appeared in the hallway. "Marcus, my office, now." Richard's voice was cold, almost surgical. The hallway seemed to shrink as Marcus followed him. Inside Richard's office, the tension was palpable. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Richard spat, pacing back and forth. "Do you realize how important this was?" "I know, and I'm sorry," Marcus began, but Richard cut him off. "Sorry isn't enough. This was a $500 million deal and you weren't here. Your absence jeopardized everything we've worked for." So Marcus took a breath, trying to stay calm. "The meeting went well, right? My team was prepared and they presented everything we needed." Richard narrowed his eyes. "Yes, the meeting went well, but that's not the point. You weren't there. What kind of message does that send to our clients, to our investors?" "I helped the little girl on my way here," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. "She was sick, alone. I couldn't just leave her." For a moment, Richard stared at him in disbelief. then laughed bitterly. So you missed the most important meeting of your career to play hero. What did that get you? Did you get paid for your good cheer? No, Marcus replied evenly, but I don't regret it. To Richard's face darkened. This company can't afford people who don't understand profit and loss. You're fired. The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Fired. After everything he had done for Halcyon, all the late nights, the weekend sacrificed. I'm sorry, Marcus, Richard continued, his tone now icy and final. But this is the end of it. Pack your things. In a daze, Marcus left the office and headed home. The reality of his situation slowly sank in as he drove through the city. Fired. After 10 years of dedication, it had all been wiped away in a single moment. As he pulled into his driveway, his phone buzzed with messages from colleagues. Some offered their sympathies, others were in disbelief. That evening, as Marcus sat on his couch, staring blankly at the job boards on his laptop, his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but something made him answer. Hello? Marcus Hale? A deep voice on the other end asked. Yes, this is Marcus. This is Edward Palmer, CEO of Don Electronics. Marcus sat up straighter, recognizing the name. Don Electronics was one of Halcyon's biggest clients, and they had been present at the meeting earlier that day. I'm calling to discuss today's meeting, Edward continued, and the situation with my daughter, Sandra. Marcus froze. The girl he had helped it couldn't be. Your daughter? Marcus stammered, his mind racing. Yes, Sandra is my daughter. I wanted to thank you personally for helping her this morning. She told me everything, but there's something else I need to address. There was a pause, then Edward's voice hardened. I've learned that you were fired because of your act of kindness. So Marcus swallowed, unsure of where this was going. I want you to know that I'm postponing any further business with Halcyon, Edward said bluntly. A company that treats its employees like disposable tools doesn't deserve our business. The breath left Marcus's lungs. Halcyon was about to lose one of its biggest clients, and it was because of him. Marcus sat in stunned silence, the weight of Edward Palmer's words sinking in. Halcyon Tech was about to lose a contract worth millions, not because of some corporate mishap, but because of its callousness toward him, its own employee. It was ironic he'd been fired for missing the meeting to help Edward's daughter, but that very act was now unraveling the company's most important partnership. I don't know what to say, Marcus finally managed, still reeling from the turn of events. Edward's voice softened slightly. You don't need to say anything, Marcus. My family owes you a debt. And frankly, I've been reconsidering my dealings with Halcyon for some time. The way they've treated you is just the final straw. A long pause followed, before Edward added, There's something else. I have an opening at Don Electronics, something that would be a perfect fit for a man of your skills and character. Would you be interested? Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. The offer was unexpected, but the timing couldn't have been more perfect. He had just lost his job, his livelihood, and here was a lifeline being thrown to him in the form of an offer from one of the industry's most powerful figures. I'd be honored, Marcus replied, his voice steady, but his mind racing with the implications. Good, Edward said, the warmth returning to his voice. My assistant will send over the details. We can discuss everything in person, but trust me, Marcus, this will be a step up. And I promise, at Don Electronics, we value people like you. After the call ended, Marcus leaned back into the couch, his mind spinning. The day had started with the promise of career-defining success, spiraled into a nightmare, and now a new door had opened. She felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. For the first time in years, he wasn't chasing after approval or a raise. Instead, he had been offered something based purely on his character, his values. Over the next few weeks, Marcus adjusted to his new role at Don Electronics. The change was immediate and striking. The culture at Don Electronics was radically different from Halcyon's profit-driven, cutthroat environment. Edward Palmer was a leader who genuinely cared about his employees, and that attitude trickled down through every department. Marcus thrived. His new position came with a substantial pay increase, but more than that, it offered him a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. He worked alongside people who respected one another, who believed in collaboration over competition. His ideas were valued, his input sought. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. So word began to spread about the fallout at Halcyon Tech. News of Don Electronics' withdrawal from the deal shook the company's foundations. Investors began to grow wary, employees were demoralized, and rumors of internal chaos spread like wildfire. Several key members of Marcus's former team handed in their resignations, disillusioned by how Halcyon had handled his firing. The atmosphere within the company turned toxic, and its stock began a slow but steady decline. So Richard Banner, once so confident and untouchable, found himself scrambling to keep the company afloat. But the damage had been done. Halcyon's reputation was tarnished, not just because of Marcus's firing, but because of the broader realization that the company valued profits over people. Clients who had once been loyal began to reconsider their partnerships, and competitors circled like sharks, eager to capitalize on Halcyon's fall from grace. Marcus heard about all of this from former colleagues who kept in touch, but he felt no sense of schadenfreude. So if anything, he felt a deep sadness for the people still working there. He had given a decade of his life to Halcyon, and now it was unraveling before his eyes. But Marcus had moved on. He had found a new place where he was respected for who he was, not just what he could produce. Just as Marcus began settling into his new life, he received an unexpected message, this time from Sarah, his ex-wife. It was brief. "We need to talk. It's about Emily." His chest tightened as he read the words. Emily, his daughter, the one bright light in his life that had dimmed after the divorce. He hadn't seen her in months, despite his efforts to maintain contact. Sarah had taken her to another state after the separation, citing her own need for a fresh start. Marcus couldn't shake the guilt that had followed him ever since. He had been too consumed with work, too focused on climbing the corporate ladder to be the father Emily had deserved. But now things were different. He wasn't the same man, driven by ambition and blind to what really mattered. They met at a quiet cafe, the same one they used to visit as a family, when Emily was just a toddler. Sarah looked older, warier, and there was a tension in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She sat down across from Marcus, folding her hands in her lap. "How have you been?" she asked, her voice cautious. I'm doing well," Marcus replied. "I've got a new job. Things are different now." She nodded, but didn't press for details. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph of Emily. Marcus's heart clenched as he saw how much his daughter had grown. Her smile was the same, but she looked taller, more mature. He realized just how much he had missed. "She misses you," Sarah said softly. "She talks about you all the time, but I didn't know how to bring you back into her life after everything." Marcus swallowed hard. "I want to be part of her life, Sarah. I've always wanted that." "I know," Sarah said, her voice heavy with regret. "And I should have let you, but I was angry. You put your job first, and I was tired of coming second. But Emily, she needs her dad." A silence fell between them, thick with the weight of unspoken words. Marcus had no defense, no excuses. He had failed them both, and now, the chance to make things right was in front of him. "I want to see her," Marcus said finally. "I want to make up for the time I've lost." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for the truth. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay, I think it's time." The first time Marcus saw Emily again, it was as if no time had passed. She ran toward him, her face lighting up with a smile that melted every ounce of tension he had been holding onto. He scooped her up into his arms, holding her close as tears welled in his eyes. For the first time in years, Marcus felt a sense of peace, a realization that the choices he had made, the sacrifices he had endured, had led him back to what truly mattered. Over the following weeks, Marcus rebuilt his relationship with Emily, taking her to the park, helping with her homework, and sharing dinners at his apartment. Slowly, they began to form new memories, filling the gaps left by the years apart. It wasn't easy. There were moments of awkwardness, and Emily sometimes pulled away, still unsure of where her father fit into her life. But Marcus was patient. He had learned the hard way that time couldn't be rushed, that some things needed to grow at their own pace. As for Halcyon Tech, the company continued to spiral downward. Marcus heard that Richard Banner had resigned under pressure from the board, and a new CEO was brought in to salvage what was left. But by then, Marcus no longer cared. His life wasn't defined by his career anymore. On a cool autumn evening, as Marcus sat on the porch of his home, watching Emily chase fireflies in the yard, his phone buzzed with a message from Edward Palmer. It was brief, just a simple note of appreciation for the work Marcus had done at Dawn Electronics. But it was more than enough. Marcus had found his place, both professionally and personally. He had come full circle from a man obsessed with success to one who understood the true value of life. The high-stakes world of corporate ambition had once consumed him, but now, it was his relationships that defined him, his connection to Emily, his friendship with colleagues, and the respect he had earned by staying true to himself. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the yard, Marcus smiled. He had made peace with the past and embraced a future built on more than just ambition. His life, once filled with betrayal, loss, and struggle, had finally found its balance. And for the first time in years, Marcus was truly happy. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe, give it a thumbs up, hit the bell, and drop a comment. Your feedback is greatly appreciated.